Necrothinker. I have risen.
Oh, wow! Necrothinker and Robothinker, two of the most powerful enemies we've ever faced, representing the extreme of gaming's past and future, locked in what's sure to be our most epic battle ever? This is gonna be awesome! What the hell just happened?
So that happened. Yeah. As you folks might have heard, the New England area where we make this show was recently buried under this lovely blizzard. I probably should have done something about that guy. Anyway, that means this titanic battle between these two opposing forces is now on hold. But the show is not. So what should I talk about?
Well, Warren Spector and David Cage talked a lot of shit at DICE and got everybody all hot and bothered, but you don't really want to do a show calling out two of the biggest, one of the biggest luminaries in the industry and also David Cage, do you?
Oh, you bet your ass I do. I should probably preface this by saying first that before I actually sat down to make this episode, I did in fact watch both Warren Spector and David Cage's full lectures given at this year's DICE event, and I encourage you to do so as well. Here's where you can find the videos. Second, I need to be very clear that I don't have much disagreement with the overall points either of these guys were making. More so, just the examples they used and the tone they took and the solutions they proposed struck me as baffling, if not simply utterly wrong-headed and occasionally just the side of personally offensive. It's a weird feeling, honestly. I mean, I'm always one for nuance and ambiguity, but it's whiplash-inducing to be listening to a guy speak and having my only two back-and-forth reactions being, oh, hey, wow, that's actually a really interesting, thought-provoking, cogent point, followed by, oh, fuck you, guy. For example, Spector's speech was primarily dedicated to exploring his own perspectives and challenges both as a gamer and a game developer entering his senior years and realizing that his needs and priorities in both realms have changed and learning how to adapt to that. All very enlightening stuff, especially when he brings it back to the need for the industry to target a more diverse audience. And then he has to spoil it with this little chestnut.
We need to think about things that are relevant to normal humans, okay? And not just the geeks we all used to be.
Geeks you used to be? Warren, your last two games were the gritty reboot of Mickey Mouse. Also, normal humans? Fuck off. Yeah, I said it. Look, I'm sure Warren Spector is a great dude, and his contributions to the medium will always be greatly blah blah blah, but I don't really give a rat's ass that he did the first Deus Ex almost 15 years ago, or that he was on Wing Commander and Ultima like 20 years ago. Yeah, fine, good stuff. That's still really kind of a seriously dicky way to phrase that concept.
Epic dicky, you might say.
I mean, yes, the medium needs to expand beyond the borders of its original traditional audience. Keyword beyond, not away from. Those so-called geeks that Spector apparently now thinks he's too good to be counted among aren't just the base of this industry, we're the goddamn foundation. Geeks we used to be. Jeez, that pisses me off. What a fucking asshole way to put it. Never mind the fact that it belies my overall issue with the guy's tone and the undercurrent of the whole rambling narrative, which mostly boiled down to the idea that because he had moved on or was no longer interested in this or that thing about gaming, well, that must mean it's no longer relevant at all. For example, length. Warren Spector no longer has the time or energy for really long games, ergo games are now too long. It makes perfect sense, providing you're viewing the entire medium through a lens of projected selfishness and myopia.
When you're this age, spectacle is plenty, and you know, blood sprays and all that stuff that we all know and love is really kind of what you're looking for, because you want to alienate people in a strange sort of way. You want to shock people, and you want to be different. Not so much anymore.
And yeah, I know that's not what he was trying to say, and I do take his point, but that's how it comes off. He ironically titled the speech, "Hey, you kids, get out of my yard," but it feels like he forgot to actually bring the irony about that. However well-intentioned, this really does just feel like a dude who checked out a long time ago, telling everyone else to turn down that damn rock and roll music. And hey, it happens. Not every creative person stays on all the way to the end. Sometimes you really have to kind of be able to recognize that.
Or maybe he really did just get bored with video games. I mean, he had a lot of time to play them when he was doing fuck all between Deus Ex and Epic Mickey. Ha! See, I can take broad, easy shots at someone else's hard work. Where's Ivan's dice lecture time, huh?
What Ivan is making reference to is that while Spector was generally careful to at least pay lip service to the idea that games that no longer interested him personally might still be worthwhile to somebody out there, he did say that some games just shouldn't be made at all, and to make his point, was reported to have flashed a screenshot of Lollipop Chainsaw.
But there's more than just time. It's not just about giving me shorter experiences. It's about the content. My interests in content have changed dramatically. And I suspect this is true for many of you. There are some games that just should not be made, by the way.
Oh, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah, that took some balls, right? Way to fight the power, maintaining that legendary iconoclast stature, boyo, standing up at DICE in a room full of designers and execs and reporters all getting high on each other's sense of how important and transformative they are to the medium, and flashing a snap of this goofy little just-for-fun arcadey Japanese title so everyone can be all, "No, ha ha ha, one of those, how droll. Of course, you'll find no such trifles here, ha 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 ha." Now, I'm not going to say that Lollipop Chainsaw was some grand masterpiece. I had fun with it, but it is what it is, and what it is the equivalent of digital junk food. Though I do think that carrying the absurdity of the ass-kicking jailbait superheroine trope to such an obvious extreme and shoving the player's face in an explicit parallel between the horror genre's beloved arterial blood spray and a girly glitter light show qualifies as clever enough to be mildly subversive. What I will say is that, well, he may not be up at DICE giving self-important lectures on what video games need to be transformed into in order to win accolades from the quote-unquote normal humans that Warren Spector seems to think he somehow evolved to join up with. Suda51 is down in the trenches of the medium, actually challenging and transforming said medium. No, not every game he and Grasshopper put out is a flawless masterpiece, but he's always trying to upend the medium and get new things out of it.
And you know what I like? Suda's video games aren't ashamed to be video games. They love being video games. In fact, they relish the fact that they're video games.
Which brings me to David Cage.
Video games also live in what I call Wonderland. They live in a dimension that is absolutely not connected to the real world. They're not connected to our reality. They talk about things that are totally unrelated to what we all know. It's not about people, it's not about our world, it's about a different dimension, a different world, something that I call Wonderland.
Now, I like David Cage. Well, okay, I don't know the guy, but I like the idea of David Cage. This guy's a musician, he goes from being a composer for games back in the 16-bit era, gets a feel for the industry and winds up fronting Quantic Dream and some outside-the-box games of his own. I respect that kind of mobility and outsider thinking in the industry. We could use more of it. Now, a lot of gamers tend to have an issue with Cage in that they feel his big games, mainly and most recently Indigo Prophecy, aka Fahrenheit, and Heavy Rain, aren't really video games so much as they are movies with multiple choice.
I remember when I was a younger designer, I pitched games to publishers. And I remember this famous meeting with an American publisher, and I was trying to explain what Indigo Prophecy was about. It was really about storytelling and emotion and relationships and characters. And he asked me, so what kind of weapons has the hero? And I said, well, the hero doesn't have a weapon. So he seemed embarrassed, and he said, oh, okay, I got it. So he drives cars. No, he doesn't drive cars. He seemed embarrassed again, and he said, oh, he jumps on platforms. No, it doesn't jump on platform. And his reaction was, then it's not a game.
I actually kind of agree with that sentiment in the broad strokes, and according to some of the production stories, Quantic Dream kind of agreed too, originally wanting to stress that Indigo Prophecy was more of an interactive film than a conventional game.
So long ago, yet still so far ahead of its time.
The difference is, I don't necessarily think that calling the kinds of work Cage has been doing not video games is the same thing as calling them not good. I'm sorry, I'm a language guy. Words mean things. And when there's no skill, competition, theoretical chance of failure involved, then no, you're not really playing, and so it's not really a game, it's something else. Interactive entertainment, a term which lots of gaming theorists at DICE and elsewhere have been tossing around lately, maybe is a better word for it. And maybe that's what needs to happen for this growth, real growth, to flourish. Gaming maybe needs to do what comic books did when they decided non-traditional comics were now to be called graphic novels. I mean, yeah, that was pretentious and arbitrary, but it did create a facade of respectable distance that allowed stuff from outside of the DC Marvel superhero paradigm to find footing and flourish in bookstores and broader venues. Again, yeah, pretentious, arbitrary, sure, but what are you gonna do? So maybe we need to come up with a new name for whatever it is David Cage is doing and let video games continue to be video games. Unfortunately, rather than trying to be his own thing, Cage's lecture was pretty much another screed that was more or less about how inferior gaming as it is and as it's been is to whatever higher life form this particular creator feels he's evolved into. Titled The Peter Pan Syndrome, the industry that refused to grow up, Cage's lecture,
Peter Pan, huh? Yeah, that's not a trite, tortured, overused metaphor or anything.
Cage's lecture starts out, and seems to want to be, something that I can really get behind, actually. Gaming needs to expand. It should be reaching out to audiences other than very young children, teenagers, and now grown adults who've been gaming their whole lives. It should be working to tackle deeper themes, relevant issues, and more complex characters. It should even be exploring design aesthetics outside the matrix of challenge and system mastery. Even though, yeah, I do agree up to a certain point you're no longer making a game in that case. It should be, like he says, growing up.
So, what's your problem?
Well, Ivan, my problem is that just like with Spector, he ends up conflating the actual myopia and immaturity of the medium, which is a real problem, with things in gaming whose only crime is no longer being of interest to him. Now, I want to parse this very carefully because I don't want it to sound overly spiteful, especially since, hey, I'm 30, so I'll be where these guys are soon enough, but there's an often confused but very important difference between growing up and growing old. More precisely, between intellectual, experiential maturity and physical, biological maturity.
Example?
Well, like, both of these guys were really big on the idea that we need to think about making games that aren't completely dependent on your skill for mastering a system and reflexes when working a controller. Now, that's totally true, but the fact that you, Warren Spector, or you, David Cage, aren't feeling as good with those reflexes as you did in younger days isn't really a vital part of that discussion. In fact, it detracts from it. Being bored with skill-based games is one thing, but no longer being good at them doesn't mean you've ascended to some kind of higher plane where such things no longer have any meaning. It just means you got older. It happens. This goes for that length thing, too.
I got to the point where a 20-hour game, perfect, you know? I could get away from my wife for a little while, you know? I could play for 20 hours. That was about it. At 50, oh my God.
I'll admit, a lot of games now are too long for me. And I don't just mean like Lords of Shadow, where literally it feels like the damn game should have been over after the vampire section, but there's actually a whole third part, and you're like, oh, come on, I'm done already. I'm talking about games where, wow, I honestly just don't have the 100+ hours to invest in this because I've got a job and bills and other obligations. I just don't have the free time I had as a kid. Now, that's a problem, but I recognized it's a problem with me, not with the game. And it seems like these two guys aren't making much effort to differentiate the two.
Well, at least they didn't start dismissing younger gamers and the games aimed at them as somehow no longer worthy of serious consideration from their lofty perch, right?
It's okay for young kids who start to play now.
We've lived through the transition from geek entertainment to mainstream, well, almost mainstream medium anyway.
We need to move from our traditional market, which is mainly kids, teenagers, young adults.
If we're going to reach a broader audience, we have to stop thinking about that audience strictly in terms of teenage boy.
And actually, you don't want to compete with people when you get older. When you're a kid, that's fine. When you're a teenager, that's fine.
Or even, you know, teenage girls.
But sometimes we go too far and we behave like stupid teenagers ourselves.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, reality check, folks. While I do agree that gaming needs to expand both its content and its horizons, if your goal is some hypothetical future where these supposedly more mature games are the reigning dominant force of the medium, or at least the more youth-oriented and teen-oriented traditional games no longer are, you're the one living in a wonderland. For good or ill, we are still in fact talking about toys here. Fantastic, sophisticated toys with the potential to tell stories, deliver messages, open minds, and expand horizons, definitely, but toys all the same. Playthings, leisure activity. You know who's got the most time for leisure activity? Like toys? Like video games? Children. And really, really rich people. So who's going to be the biggest consumers of the same? Children, and really, really rich people. Everyone else has other stuff to do first. I'm sorry, that's just the world. So you can, at your peril, dismiss kids and toys as so far beneath your concerns, but they are always going to be the bread and butter of this medium, the foundation. Maybe they're not where you want to focus your attention, but that doesn't mean they're somehow less deserving of attention from someone else.
Man, this is like the designer's equivalent of when older Pokemon fans complain that the series hasn't changed or progressed enough. Yeah, no shit, genius, it's Pokemon. It's not supposed to progress. You were. You want the more mature, granular version of Pokemon? It's called every other Japanese RPG.
I say again, I agree that gaming has a lot of maturing to do in terms of content, in terms of the way we handle criticism, in terms of the way the industry polices itself, in terms of our relationship to other media. But the advice these guys are offering, however well meant, that's not going to lead to an industry growing up. It's going to lead to an industry growing old, petrifying, collapsing, decaying. You see, youth, and I'm talking about the psychology of youth, not strictly the temporal biological state of being young. I know a lot of young people who are already old and a lot of older people who never seem to get old. Has its drawbacks, inexperience and impatience primarily, but it has many more benefits. Vitality, vigor, imagination, creativity, bravery, courage, guts. Those are things that any medium that fancies itself artistic in any way needs to survive, even when they manifest as crude, lowbrow, aggressive, or shocking. In fact, especially in those cases. Which is why nothing in either of these two diatribes got me,
and me,
more straight-up, eye-rollingly pissed off than this business from Mr. Spector.
Well, when I was younger, that's all I needed. All I wanted was to differentiate myself from other people. You know, if it was gonna convince my mother that I was gonna turn into a juvenile delinquent, I was there. I needed to be transgressive, and adrenaline rush and spectacle were all I needed. And
this business from Mr. Cage.
Some games just go over the top for the sake of having more blood or more sex or being more shocking than their competitors. And I think that's also a mistake. We want to get credibility.
I won't necessarily say there's something wrong with a person losing the taste for button-pushing, in-your-face expressions of sex, violence, and other extremes of human passion as they get older. It hasn't happened to me yet, but I can't promise that it won't, brain chemistry and all that. But I will say that when it happens to a medium, it's usually the beginning of the end. Even when artificially induced, the vibrant, passionate vigor that informs the human psyche's lust for blood, sex, and all the rest is the fuel behind art itself, even if it's not the focus of every work. What's funny is, elsewhere in the lecture, Cage goes on a tangent against the gaming press, where he calls for a game journalism equivalent to Cahiers de Cinéma, the legendary French magazine of film criticism that helped kick off the new wave and was instrumental in changing the way film culture and film history was looked at. Now, I'm 100% behind that, but given the rest of his approach, it doesn't feel like Cage, who, by the way, is French himself, really gets what Cahiers de Cinéma was and what it did. Cahiers and its writers, many of whom eventually became great filmmakers in their own right, like Jean-Luc Godard and François Truffaut, did not generally champion the so-called serious or important movies of their time, at least not during the period where it was most relevant. Instead, they championed the re-examination of popular films and film genres that had come to be considered lowbrow or common. Alfred Hitchcock thrillers, Howard Hawks, Nicholas Ray, melodramatic gangster movies, that sort of thing. A true gaming version of Cahiers would not be paying much attention to the kind of self-consciously serious material a guy like Cage is making. It would probably be arguing that lowly stuff like Chiller or Time Killer or DOA Volleyball were actually more meaningful than we'd given them credit for.
Hey, I just thought of something. Those DOA volleyball things are totally games where the actual game of skill parts take a back seat to narrative of the girls all bonding and the sensory engagement of you gawking at them. You think we can get these guys to sign those games up as paragons of this new gaming movement? Yeah, I didn't think so.
Not every game needs to be or should be Mortal Kombat or Bayonetta, but a medium without the drive or ability to create such things will not be long for this world. I promise you this, a games industry that completely loses its innate punk rock, fuck you motherfucker compulsion to flaunt convention, bray at moral standards, assail basic decency, bare its fangs, and flash its ass just for the pure, visceral, adolescent thrill of watching the prudish, the priggish, and, yes, the old and uptight, recoil in abject horror at the raw, seething energy of life laid bare and beautiful before them, is a games industry that has lost its way and will soon lose its everything.
Amen.
And that's why it's important to not only resist censorship in the form of outside forces looking to impose some arbitrary moralism, but also to question what may seem like natural tendencies towards self-censorship. For example,
We can use, again, sex and violence, that's fine. If there is a context, if it's not gratuitous, if it's not for the sake of being shocking, that's okay. But sometimes we go too far and we behave like stupid teenagers ourselves. And we should stop doing this, because this is a matter of being responsible towards our industry, but also towards society.
Huh. Responsibility, huh? David, let me introduce you to another David. David Cronenberg.
You'll like him. He's a big-shot Hollywood movie director. You know, like you seem to want to be.
Well, either way, here's what David Cronenberg had to say about the responsibility of an artist. An artist's responsibility is to be irresponsible. As soon as you start to think about social or political responsibility, you've amputated the best limbs you've got as an artist. You are plugging into a very restrictive system that is going to push and mold you, and is going to make your art totally useless and ineffective. Well, that certainly says it.
And when it comes to games needing to try to have more of a message or depth, you don't need to throw out genre convention to do that. When the Western genre got too stale and safe, they didn't stop making cowboy movies. They started making better cowboy movies.
Look, folks, I'm not saying these guys are all wrong, just that it'd be a huge mistake to essentially say that the need for gaming to grow beyond its conventional themes and audience means it also has to move away from those things. It doesn't, and it shouldn't. If video games are to mature, let them mature into something with the confidence and wisdom to not give a fuck about what everyone else thinks of its supposed maturity. Gaming needs to grow up? Yes, agreed, but we'd better not let it grow old in the process.
I'm effectively immortal, so it's all kind of relevant for me, but yeah, what he said.
And that's what I have to say about that. Thanks for watching, folks. Now, excuse me, I've got to go take care of that guy so we can get this titanic battle underway for next episode.